My son chose his wedding over my emergency heart surgery. I was lying in a hospital bed, chest cracked open for the second time that day, when I heard him tell the nurse he couldn't postpone his reception because the deposits were non-refundable. "Dad'll understand," he said, adjusting his boutonniere in the hallway mirror. "He's tough. He's been through worse." But what happened 3 hours later at that country club would change everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Millfield, Ohio. I was tending to Dorothy's roses in our backyard when the pain hit. Not the usual ache in my 72-year-old joints, but something different. Something that grabbed my chest like a vice and squeezed until the world tilted sideways. The garden hose slipped from my hands, sending water cascading across the tomato plants Dot had started 3 springs ago, before the cancer took her. Mrs. Kowalski found me 20 minutes later, sprawled between the rose bushes and the fence line we'd painted together last summer. Eleanor had been bringing me casseroles twice a week since the funeral, worried I wasn't eating properly in that empty house on Maple Street. She called 911 before she even checked my pulse, her voice carrying across the neighborhood like a prayer sent skyward. The paramedics loaded me into the ambulance while neighbors gathered on their porches, faces etched with the kind of concern small towns reserve for their own. Through the rear window, I could see my modest ranch house growing smaller, Dorothy's wind chimes still turning in the morning breeze. 47 years we'd lived there, raising David, hosting neighborhood barbecues, building a life from factory wages and weekend projects. At Millfield General, Dr. Martinez explained the situation with the gentle authority of someone who delivered difficult news many times before. Massive heart attack. Emergency surgery required immediately. Bypass procedure that would take hours and require a lengthy recovery. He spoke in measured tones, while nurses bustled around my bed preparing machines that would keep me alive while surgeons worked to repair what decades of hard labor had finally broken. I asked for my phone with hands that still shook from the morning's trauma. David needed to know. My son, who lived 2 hours away in Columbus, building his marketing career and planning his future with Stephanie. The call went straight to voicemail, his professional greeting echoing in the sterile hospital room where monitors beeped their electronic symphony. "David, it's Dad. I'm at the hospital. Heart attack this morning. They're taking me into surgery in an hour. I love you, son. Call me back." My voice cracked on those last words, and I ended the call before emotion could overtake what might be my final message to the boy who'd been the center of my world since Dorothy left. The surgical team wheeled me toward the operating room while afternoon sunlight slanted through hospital windows. Millfield General wasn't fancy, but it was where Emma had been born 8 years ago, where Dorothy had spent her final days, where Dr. Santos had delivered both the best and worst news of my life. The familiar hallways felt like a journey through time as anesthesia began clouding my thoughts. 5 hours later, I woke to beeping machines and the antiseptic smell of recovery. Nurse Williams, a woman who'd tended half of Millfield through various medical crises, checked my vitals with practiced efficiency. The surgery had gone well, she explained, but my heart would need time to heal. Visitors would be limited for the first few days while my body adjusted to the trauma of having my chest opened and repaired. "Has my son called?" I asked, voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. Patricia glanced at the nurse's station, where no messages waited, then back at me with the kind of professional sympathy that never quite masked genuine concern. "Not yet, Mr. Mitchell. But sometimes family doesn't know how to reach patients right after surgery. The phone system can be confusing." She adjusted my pillows with gentle hands that had comforted countless patients through their darkest hours. That evening, Frank Rosenberg visited during designated hours. My longtime friend from the steelworks sat beside my bed with the awkwardness of a man more comfortable with machinery than medical equipment. We'd worked side by side for 30 years, shared lunch breaks and weekend fishing trips, watched each other's children grow up and move away. Eleanor called half the neighborhood, Frank said, settling into the plastic visitor chair with a slight grimace. His own joints carried the wear of decades spent lifting heavy steel and operating industrial equipment. Everyone's asking about you. Mrs. Patterson made enough soup to feed an army. Says she'll bring it by when you're home. We talked about inconsequential things. The weather, the factory's new owners, the way Millfield kept shrinking as young people moved to bigger cities for better opportunities. But underneath our conversation lay the question neither of us wanted to voice. Where was David? Why hadn't my only child, my son who called every Sunday without fail, responded to the most important message I'd ever left him? The next morning brought Dr. Martinez with updates on my recovery. The surgery had been successful, but my heart had sustained significant damage. Physical therapy would be necessary, lifestyle changes mandatory. The retirement I'd been planning to spend traveling with Dorothy's memory would now be measured in careful steps and monitored activities. "Do you have family support at home?" Dr. Martinez asked, reviewing my chart with the thoroughness of someone who understood that healing required more than medical intervention. "The first few weeks will be crucial. You'll need help with daily activities, meal preparation, transportation to follow-up appointments." I thought about the empty house on Maple Street, about Emma's drawings still magneted to my refrigerator from her last visit, about the garden that would need tending while I recovered from having my chest cracked open to save my life. "My son lives in Columbus. He'll help." The words came out with more confidence than I felt, given the silence that had stretched through another night. Wednesday brought Stephanie's bridal shower preparations. According to the voicemail David finally left while I was napping, his voice sounded distant, preoccupied with wedding logistics and timeline pressures. "Sorry I missed your call, Dad. Things are crazy here with the wedding this Saturday. Stephanie's parents flew in from California and there's so much to coordinate. Hope you're feeling better. I'll try to call again soon." Feeling better, as if a massive heart attack was comparable to a common cold that rest and chicken soup might cure. I stared at my phone screen, reading and rereading the message transcript, searching for acknowledgement of the surgery, concern about my condition, any indication that my son understood the severity of what had happened. Thursday's call was briefer still. "Dad, got your message about the hospital. That sounds rough. I wish I could visit, but the rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night, and Stephanie's family has planned all these events. You understand how weddings are. I'll call you after the honeymoon and we can catch up properly. Love you." Catch up properly. Like my heart attack was social news we'd discuss over coffee rather than a medical emergency that had nearly ended my life. I lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by get-well cards from neighbors and coworkers, flowers from Dorothy's garden club friends, and the deafening silence from the son I'd raised alone after his mother died. Friday evening, Dr. Martinez returned with discharge instructions and follow-up appointments scheduled through the next month. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My recovery would be lengthy, requiring assistance with household tasks and careful monitoring of my cardiac health. "Is your son able to help during the initial recovery period?" he asked, pen poised over my chart. "He's getting married Saturday," I replied, the words tasting bitter in the fluorescent-lit room where I'd spent 4 days healing from surgery my child hadn't bothered to acknowledge. "But he'll be back from his honeymoon soon." Dr. Martinez nodded with the neutral expression medical professionals master when family dynamics complicate patient care. We can arrange visiting nurse services if needed. Your health is the priority right now." That night, I called David one final time. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail, his cheerful greeting promising to return calls as soon as possible. In the background, I could hear music and laughter from what sounded like his bachelor party celebration. "David, it's Dad again. I'm being discharged tomorrow morning. The surgery was major, son. They had to repair 3 blocked arteries and replace a valve. I almost died Tuesday morning in Dorothy's garden. I need you to understand what that means. I need you to call me back." But Saturday morning brought only silence as I signed discharge papers and accepted Mrs. Kowalski's offer to drive me home. The house felt different after 4 days away, smaller somehow, filled with the echoes of a life interrupted by medical crisis and family absence. In my bedroom, I found the wedding invitation propped against Dorothy's photograph on the dresser. The grand ballroom at Riverside Country Club. Reception immediately following ceremony. The elegant script seemed to mock the reality of my son choosing celebration over crisis, deposits over devotion. As I settled into my recliner with medication reminders and recovery instructions, I wondered what Dorothy would have said about her son's priorities. She'd raised him to value family above all else, to understand that love meant showing up when it mattered most. Outside, Millfield continued its quiet rhythm while 60 miles away, my son prepared to pledge his life to someone else, having abandoned the man who'd given him life itself. Saturday afternoon settled over Maple Street with the kind of gentle warmth that made Dorothy's roses bloom their brightest. I sat in my recliner, medication schedule taped to the side table, watching shadows lengthen across the hardwood floors we'd installed together 20 years ago. The house felt hollow without her laughter filling the corners, but today the emptiness carried a different weight. My son was walking down an aisle 60 miles away, promising his life to someone else while I recovered alone from surgery that could have been my last breath. Frank arrived at 2 o'clock with a thermos of coffee and the weekend newspaper, settling into Dorothy's old chair with the careful movements of a man whose body carried decades of hard labor. We'd shared comfortable silences before, but this afternoon the quiet between us hummed with unspoken questions about family loyalty and the ways children sometimes forget the sacrifices their parents made. "Emma called this morning," Frank said, unfolding the sports section with deliberate concentration. "Wanted to know if you were feeling better. That granddaughter of yours has more sense than some adults I know." His voice carried the gentle reproach of someone who'd watched me raise David from a grieving 8-year-old into the man who now apparently valued wedding deposits over medical emergencies. I thought about Emma's last visit, how she'd helped me plant marigolds around Dorothy's memorial garden, her small hands carefully patting soil around each flower while asking endless questions about her grandmother's favorite colors and songs. At 8 years old, she possessed an intuitive understanding of love and loss that her father seemed to have misplaced somewhere between childhood and corporate success. I saw Dorothy in her garden, tending roses with the patience she'd shown everything she loved. I saw David as a teenager, angry and confused after his mother's funeral, lashing out at the world that had taken her away too soon. Those had been the hardest years. Learning to be both father and mother to a boy whose grief manifested as rebellion against everything I tried to provide. I'd worked double shifts at the steel plant during those years, saving every extra dollar for David's college fund, while he struggled through high school with grades that reflected his emotional turmoil more than his intelligence. Guidance counselors called regularly, concerned about his attitude and attendance. I attended every conference, every meeting, trying to understand how to help a son navigate loss I barely comprehended myself. The phone rang at 4:30, startling me from memories that felt more vivid than the present moment. Stephanie's voice came through the speaker, bright with wedding day excitement and perhaps something else I couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Mitchell, it's Stephanie. I wanted to check on you before the ceremony starts.
David mentioned you had some kind of medical episode this week. Are you feeling better? Her tone carried the polite concern of someone fulfilling an obligation, rather than expressing genuine worry. Heart surgery, I corrected gently. Emergency bypass procedure, but I'm recovering well. Thank you for asking. I waited for her response, curious whether my son had downplayed the severity of my condition or simply failed to communicate it accurately. The pause stretched long enough for me to hear wedding venue sounds in the background. Musicians tuning instruments, catering staff arranging tables, the orchestrated chaos of a celebration that would continue, regardless of family medical crises. Oh my goodness, that sounds serious. I had no idea it was that major. David just said you were in the hospital for some tests. Her voice shifted, carrying what might have been genuine surprise. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything? Tests. My son had reduced emergency heart surgery to routine medical tests, minimizing a life-threatening crisis into something comparable to an annual physical. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of disappointment settle deeper into my chest than any surgical pain. I'm managing fine, dear. I hope you have a beautiful wedding day. You and David deserve happiness. The words came automatically, the kind of gracious response Dorothy would have expected, even when family failed to meet basic standards of care and concern. After we hung up, I sat staring at Dorothy's photograph on the mantelpiece, remembering the promises we'd made about raising our son with values that seemed increasingly foreign to the man he'd become. She died believing David would grow into someone who honored family obligations, who understood that success meant more than salary figures in the social status. Sunday morning brought Mrs. Kowalski with homemade soup and updates from the neighborhood prayer chain that had formed around my recovery. Eleanor settled into the kitchen with the comfortable authority of someone who'd been managing family crises for 7 decades, heating soup while sharing news about who'd sent flowers and who'd offered help with grocery shopping. That Patricia Williams from the hospital called yesterday, Eleanor said, ladling soup into bowls with the precision of long practice. Wanted to make sure you had everything you needed at home. Nice woman. She mentioned your son was getting married yesterday. Her tone remained carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying question about David's absence during my medical emergency. Beautiful wedding, from what I hear, I replied, tasting soup that reminded me of Dorothy's cooking and the Sunday dinners we'd shared as a family before cancer and corporate ambition changed everything. They'll be honeymooning in California for 2 weeks, Napa Valley wine country.
Eleanor nodded with the diplomatic expression she'd perfected during decades of navigating neighborhood social dynamics. Well, honeymoons are important too. I'm sure he'll visit once they're settled back home. But her eyes held the same skepticism I felt about my son's priorities and their likelihood of improvement. That afternoon, I walked slowly around Dorothy's garden, checking the progress of vegetables I'd planted before my heart attack interrupted ordinary life. The tomatoes showed early green fruit, and the bean plants climbed their stakes with determined growth that reminded me of Dorothy's optimism about everything she nurtured. She'd believed in tending relationships the same way she cared for plants, with consistent attention and unconditional love. The phone rang while I was watering marigolds, David's number appearing on the screen for the first time since his brief wedding update messages. I answered on the 4th ring, settling onto the garden bench we'd built together during his high school years, when he still valued spending time with his old man. "Dad, hey, it's me. Just wanted to check in before we head out to dinner. How you feeling?" His voice carried the casual tone of someone discussing weekend plans rather than following up on his father's major surgery. "Recovering slowly. The doctors say it'll be several weeks before I'm back to normal activities. How was the wedding?" I kept my voice steady, though part of me wanted to ask why he'd reduced emergency heart surgery to routine medical tests when talking to his new wife. "Amazing. Absolutely perfect. Stephanie looked incredible, and the venue exceeded our expectations. Her parents were so impressed with everything we'd planned. The flowers, the band, the menu, even the weather cooperated perfectly." His enthusiasm bubbled through the phone while I sat surrounded by Dorothy's memorial garden, alone with recovery instructions and prescription bottles. "I'm glad it was everything you hoped for," I said.
meaning it despite the pain of his absence during my crisis. Marriage is a sacred commitment. Your mother and I had 43 wonderful years together. Right, exactly. Stephanie and I are so excited about building our future together. Speaking of which, we're thinking about buying a house when we get back from the honeymoon. Something bigger, maybe in one of the newer developments outside Columbus. Stephanie's parents have offered to help with the down payment. His words painted pictures of a life expanding away from Millfield, away from the modest ranch house where he'd grown up, away from the father who'd raised him alone after tragedy struck our family. We talked for a few more minutes about honeymoon plans and career opportunities, surface conversations that avoided addressing the elephant neither of us wanted to name. When he hung up, promising to call again soon, I remained on the garden bench watching evening light fade across the backyard where he'd learned to ride a bicycle and play catch and trust that his father would always be there when needed. That week passed in a rhythm of medication schedules and gentle exercise, visitors bringing meals and company, phone calls from concerned neighbors and former coworkers. Dr. Martinez called twice to check on my progress, adjusting prescriptions and scheduling follow-up appointments with the thoroughness of someone who understood that recovery required more than physical healing. Frank visited daily, sometimes bringing his grandson Tommy to help with yard work I couldn't manage yet. The boy reminded me of David at that age, eager to help and full of questions about how things worked and why adults made certain choices. Tommy approached my recovery with the straightforward concern children possess before life teaches them to complicate simple emotions like love and loyalty.
"Is your son coming to visit soon?" Tommy asked one afternoon while we sat on the front porch watching him weed Dorothy's flower beds. His question carried the innocent assumption that family members naturally gathered during medical emergencies, that love manifested through presence rather than phone calls. "He's on his honeymoon right now," I explained, watching the boy's face process this information with the logic of someone still young enough to expect family to prioritize correctly. "But he'll visit when he gets back home." Tommy nodded with the acceptance of childhood, but his next words revealed wisdom beyond his years. "My mom says when people get sick, family should come help them get better, even if it's inconvenient." His matter-of-fact tone carried implications I wasn't ready to examine too closely. The following Thursday brought a phone call from Stephanie, her voice carrying the relaxed happiness of someone returning from vacation, refreshed and optimistic. She chatted about Napa Valley wineries and the charming bed and breakfast where they'd stayed, painting pictures of romantic dinners and scenic drives through California countryside. "David's at the office catching up on emails," she explained, "but he wanted me to call and see how you're doing. Are you feeling stronger? Getting around okay?" Her concerns sounded genuine, though filtered through the second-hand nature of information passed between spouses rather than communicated directly between father and son. "Much better, thank you. Physical therapy is helping and my energy levels are improving daily. How are you two adjusting to married life?" I kept the conversation light, avoiding questions about why David hadn't called himself or when they might visit Millfield to check on my recovery in person. "We're wonderful. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. We found the perfect house, and David's parents offered to help with closing costs. It's in a really nice development about an hour outside Columbus. Great schools for when we start a family, beautiful neighborhood with all new construction." Her excitement was infectious, painting visions of suburban prosperity and planned communities where success was measured by square footage and property values. An hour outside Columbus meant 2.5 hours from Millfield, from the modest ranch house where Dorothy and I had raised David, from the aging father who might need increasing assistance as recovery from major heart surgery progressed. The distance felt deliberate, a geographical buffer between the life David was building and the humble beginnings he seemed eager to leave behind. After we hung up, I sat in Dorothy's chair thinking about the changes time brings to families, how children grow up and create new loyalties, while parents age into increasing dependence on relationships they thought were permanent. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Kowalski tending her own garden, her husband's memorial bench positioned where she could talk to him while she worked among the flowers they'd planted together. That evening, Frank arrived with takeout dinner from the diner where we'd eaten countless meals over the decades. We sat at my kitchen table surrounded by photographs of family celebrations and milestone moments, eating meatloaf and mashed potatoes while discussing the ways life surprised us with endings we never anticipated. "Dorothy would be proud of how you're handling all this," Frank said, cutting his meatloaf with the careful movements of someone whose arthritis made simple tasks more challenging. The surgery, the recovery, even David's situation. She always said you were the strongest man she knew. I thought about strength and its various definitions, about the difference between surviving life's blows and thriving despite them. Dorothy possessed a different kind of strength, the ability to love unconditionally, even when that love wasn't returned with equal measure. She'd have found a way to bridge the growing distance between her son and the family that shaped him. Later that night, I called David directly, reaching his voicemail after several rings. The recorded message mentioned their new house purchase and requested patience with delayed responses during the moving process. I left a brief message expressing happiness about their new home and reminding him that I loved him, whatever changes life brought to our relationship. But as I prepared for bed with medication reminders and recovery instructions, I wondered whether love alone could overcome the growing realization that my son had chosen his new life over the one that gave him existence. Tomorrow would bring another day of healing, another opportunity to hope that family bonds prove stronger than the distance and indifference that seemed to be expanding between us like a wound that refused to close. 3 weeks after my discharge, David finally called to announce they'd closed on their new house. His voice bubbled with enthusiasm about granite countertops and hardwood floors, walk-in closets, and a 3-car garage that would accommodate both their vehicles plus storage for sporting equipment. The development boasted amenities I'd never considered necessities: a community pool and fitness center, manicured walking trails, and a clubhouse for social gatherings. "You should see this place, Dad. Everything's brand new. State-of-the-art appliances, smart home technology, even heated bathroom floors. Stephanie's parents helped us get into something we never could have afforded on our own." His pride rang through the phone while I sat in my modest kitchen, surrounded by appliances Dorothy and I had saved months to purchase, fixtures we'd installed ourselves during weekend projects that stretched across seasons. "Sounds impressive, son. When do you think you might visit Millfield? I'd love to see some pictures, hear about your new neighborhood." The invitation slipped out before I could stop it, carrying more hope than I'd intended to reveal. The pause stretched long enough for me to hear Stephanie talking in the background, something about meeting with an interior designer to select window treatments and coordinate color schemes throughout their new home. When David responded, his tone had shifted slightly, carrying the diplomatic distance I'd grown accustomed to during our recent conversations. "We're pretty swamped with the move and getting settled. Plus, Stephanie's starting her new job next week, and I've got a big presentation coming up for potential clients. Maybe in a few months when things calm down." The promise felt hollow, a polite deflection rather than genuine intent to maintain family connections. After we hung up, I walked slowly through rooms where David had spent his childhood. Past photographs documenting birthday parties and school achievements, Christmas mornings and summer vacations when our small family felt complete despite Dorothy's absence. The house held memories in every corner, but increasingly, those memories felt like artifacts from a life that mattered less with each passing day. Frank arrived that afternoon with Emma in tow, my granddaughter carrying a handmade card decorated with flowers and hearts, her 8-year-old handwriting spelling out, "Get well soon, Grandpa," in careful letters that brought tears to my eyes. She settled beside me on the couch with the natural affection children possess before they learn to complicate love with conditions and expectations. "Daddy said you had an operation on your heart," Emma said, studying my face with the serious expression she'd inherited from Dorothy's side of the family. "Does it hurt now? Are the doctors sure you're going to be okay?" Her questions carried the straightforward concern adults often abandon in favor of more complicated responses to medical crises. "The doctors fixed everything that was broken," I assured her, wrapping my arm around her small shoulders. "My heart is getting stronger every day. especially when I spend time with people I love." She nodded with satisfaction, apparently accepting this explanation with the faith children place in adults they trust. We spent the afternoon working on a jigsaw puzzle Dorothy had started months before her death. Emma's patient persistence reminded me of her grandmother's approach to complex problems. She asked questions about Dorothy's favorite activities, about the garden we'd tended together, about the quilts still folded in the linen closet that carried the scent of Dorothy's perfume even now. "Why doesn't Daddy visit you more?" Emma asked suddenly, the question emerging with the innocent directness children use when adult behavior confuses them. "When I'm sick, he stays home from work to take care of me. Don't grown-ups need taking care of too?" Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing the impossible position Emma's question created. How do you explain to a child that love sometimes becomes conditional, that adult priorities can overshadow family obligations, that sons sometimes grow into men their parents no longer recognize? "Your daddy has many responsibilities now," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults have to balance different needs and make difficult choices." The words tasted inadequate even as I spoke them, diplomatic answers that protected everyone except the truth Emma deserved to understand. She considered this explanation with the thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to complex concepts. But shouldn't family be the most important responsibility? Her logic possessed the clarity adults often lose in their navigation of competing priorities and social expectations. That evening, after Frank and Emma had gone home to their own family dinner, I sat in Dorothy's chair reading the letter that had arrived in that day's mail. The return address showed Millfield Elementary School, where I'd volunteered as a reading tutor for 15 years after retiring from the steel plant. Principal Johnson's handwriting filled 2 pages with gratitude for my service and an invitation to the upcoming volunteer appreciation ceremony. "Your dedication to our students has made an immeasurable difference in countless young lives," she wrote. "Children who struggled with reading have flourished under your patient guidance. Many of our graduates still speak fondly of the time you spent helping them discover the joy of books and learning. We hope you'll join us for this special celebration of your contributions to our school community." I thought about those afternoons spent in the school library, working with children whose reading difficulties masked sharp intellects and creative minds. Some came from homes where books were luxuries rather than necessities, where parents worked multiple jobs to provide basic needs and had little time for educational enrichment. Others struggled with learning disabilities that required patience and alternative approaches to traditional teaching methods. There was Marcus, whose dyslexia made simple sentences feel like insurmountable obstacles, until we discovered his gift for understanding stories through audio formats. Sarah, whose shyness dissolved when she found adventure novels that matched her love of horses and outdoor exploration. Tommy Chen, whose English language skills blossomed as he shared stories from his family's immigration experience, building bridges between cultures through literature that celebrated diversity. Each child had taught me something about resilience, about the power of individual attention to transform struggling students into confident learners. Their progress filled a purpose in my retirement years that financial security or leisure activities could never match. These children appreciated effort in ways my own son seemed to have forgotten, expressing gratitude for time and attention with handmade cards and enthusiastic hugs. The volunteer appreciation ceremony would recognize contributions I'd made not for recognition, but because children deserved adults who invested in their futures without expecting anything in return. It struck me that these students, many from challenging circumstances, showed more gratitude for my involvement than David had demonstrated for 26 years of devoted fatherhood.
Wednesday brought a phone call from Dr. Martinez's office, scheduling my 6-week follow-up appointment and reminding me to bring current medications for review. My recovery had progressed well enough to reduce some restrictions, though vigorous activities remained off limits until further notice. The nurse asked about my support system at home, whether family members were available to assist with transportation and daily activities as my strength returned. "My son lives a few hours away," I explained, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time I spoke them. "But I have good neighbors and friends helping with whatever I need."
Mrs. Kowalski had indeed become my unofficial caretaker, checking on me daily and coordinating assistance from other neighbors who remembered kindnesses I'd shown their families over the decades. That afternoon, I decided to call David directly rather than wait for his increasingly infrequent check-in calls. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, his cheerful message promising to return calls when his schedule permitted. I left a brief message about the doctor's appointment and my continued recovery, mentioning the volunteer appreciation ceremony in case he might want to attend. 2 days passed before David returned my call, catching me as I sorted through Dorothy's recipe collection, planning simple meals that would support my cardiac recovery without requiring too much kitchen effort. His voice carried the distracted tone of someone multitasking, handling our conversation while managing other priorities. "Sorry I missed your call, Dad. Things are absolutely crazy with the new house and Stephanie's job transition. She's working with a demanding client who wants everything completed by next month. Plus, I'm traveling more for my position, trying to land some major accounts that could really boost our income." His words painted pictures of busy lives and important responsibilities that left little room for family concerns. "How are you feeling?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested the question was perfunctory rather than genuinely concerned. "Getting around okay? Managing all right on your own?" The queries felt like boxes to check, rather than expressions of authentic worry about my well-being. "Much better, thank you. The doctor says my heart is healing well, though full recovery will take several months. I wanted to invite you to something special next Friday. Millfield Elementary is holding a volunteer appreciation ceremony, and they're honoring my 15 years of reading tutoring. It would mean a lot if you could attend." I kept my voice hopeful, despite growing certainty that his answer would disappoint. The pause that followed contained enough silence for me to hear Stephanie talking in the background, discussing fabric samples and furniture delivery schedules with someone who sounded like an interior designer. When David finally responded, his words carried the apologetic tone of someone declining an obligation rather than missing a meaningful family event. "That sounds really nice, Dad, and I'm proud of all the work you've done with those kids, but next Friday is impossible. Stephanie has a client presentation that could lead to a major contract, and I promised I'd be there for support. Plus, we're meeting with contractors about some renovation projects we want to start immediately. Rain check?" The question mark at the end felt rhetorical, a polite gesture toward future possibilities neither of us believed would materialize. After we hung up, I remained sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by Dorothy's recipe cards, each one annotated with notes about family preferences and special occasions. Her handwriting documented decades of meals shared with love, celebrations marked by favorite dishes, ordinary evenings elevated by the care she put into nourishing the people she cherished. I found the card for David's favorite birthday cake, chocolate with peanut butter frosting, Dorothy's careful instructions including reminders about his nut allergies and suggestions for decorating techniques that would delight a growing boy.
She'd made that cake 18 times, from his 8th birthday until he left for college, each one crafted with attention to details that communicated love through sugar and flour. When had he stopped appreciating such gestures? When had career advancement become more important than the people who'd sacrificed for his opportunities? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when my son had transformed from the grateful boy who'd hugged me after every parent-teacher conference into the man who scheduled family around business commitments and social obligations. That evening, Emma called to tell me about her school day, her voice bright with excitement about a science project involving plant growth and her reading group's progress through a chapter book series. She chattered about friends and teachers, weekend plans with Frank's family, her hopes for summer activities when school ended in a few weeks. "Will you come to my spring concert next Thursday?" she asked, the invitation carrying the confident expectation children possess when they believe adults prioritize their important moments. "I have a solo in one of the songs, and Grandpa Frank says you're the best audience member because you always remember to clap at the right times." I wouldn't miss it for anything, I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my healing heart. What song are you singing solo? Her detailed explanation of lyrics and melody filled me with the anticipation grandparents feel when grandchildren trust them with precious moments. After we hung up, I marked her concert on the calendar Dorothy had used to track family events, medical appointments, and community activities. The simple act of writing Emma's concert in careful letters felt like a sacred commitment, a promise to prioritize what truly mattered, regardless of physical limitations or recovery schedules. Later that night, I stood in Dorothy's garden, watching stars emerge in the clear Ohio sky, thinking about legacy and the different ways people choose to invest their limited time on Earth. Some pursued wealth and status, measuring success through possessions and professional achievements. Others found meaning in relationships and service, building treasure that couldn't be quantified but enriched lives in immeasurable ways. Dorothy had understood this distinction, choosing always to invest in people rather than accumulate things. She'd volunteered at the church food pantry, organized neighborhood cleanups, visited elderly residents at the nursing home, and treated every interaction as an opportunity to spread kindness and genuine care. Her legacy lived in the countless lives she'd touched through simple acts of compassion and genuine care. I wondered what legacy David was building, whether the granite countertops and smart home technology would bring him the satisfaction he seemed to be seeking, whether Stephanie's career success and their impressive social status would fill the spaces where family connection and community service might have flourished. Tomorrow would bring another day of recovery and reflection, another opportunity to choose how I wanted to spend whatever years remained. The volunteer appreciation ceremony would celebrate contributions I'd made not for recognition, but because children deserved adults who believed in their potential. Emma's concert would showcase talents nurtured by family support and encouragement. These events would happen with or without David's presence, their significance unchanged by his absence. But his choices were creating distance that might prove impossible to bridge, separation that went deeper than geographical miles to touch the fundamental bonds that define family. The emergency began at 3 a.m, with chest pains that felt different from the healing aches I'd grown accustomed to during my recovery. This wasn't the surgical tenderness that reminded me daily of my repaired heart, but something sharper, more urgent, radiating down my left arm with the familiar warning signs that sent me reaching for my cell phone with trembling fingers. Mrs. Kowalski arrived before the ambulance, her housecoat thrown over pajamas as she responded to my panicked call with the swift efficiency of someone who'd navigated multiple family medical crises over 70 years.
She held my hand while paramedics checked vital signs and prepared me for transport, her weathered face calm, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "Call David," I managed to say as they loaded me onto the stretcher, though even speaking those words felt like admitting defeat. After weeks of his increasing distance, the thought of needing him again made my chest tighten with more than physical pain. The emergency room at Millfield General buzzed with the controlled urgency of medical professionals managing multiple crises simultaneously. Dr. Martinez appeared within minutes, his expression grave as he reviewed test results that confirmed my worst fears. The stress of recovery had triggered another cardiac event, not as severe as my initial heart attack, but serious enough to require immediate intervention and extended monitoring. "We need to keep you for observation," he explained, while nurses attached monitors that would track every heartbeat through the uncertain hours ahead. "This episode suggests your heart is still vulnerable. We'll need to adjust your medications and possibly consider additional procedures depending on how you respond to treatment." The familiar hospital room felt different this time, charged with the weight of a second chance that might not lead to a third. Through the window, dawn was breaking over Millfield, with the gentle light that had greeted me through countless mornings, but today it illuminated the possibility that my time in this small Ohio town might be drawing to a close sooner than expected. Eleanor called David's number from my phone while I lay connected to machines that beeped and hummed their electronic symphony. The call went directly to voicemail, his professional greeting promising to return messages when his schedule permitted. She left a detailed message about my condition and location, emphasizing the urgency of the situation with the authority of someone who'd witnessed enough medical emergencies to recognize genuine crisis. "He'll call back," she assured me, though uncertainty flickered in her voice.
Once he gets the message, he'll understand how serious this is. Morning passed into afternoon without word from David. Nurses changed shifts, Dr. Martinez made rounds checking my progress, and Frank arrived with flowers from Dorothy's garden and quiet companionship that asked no questions about family absences. We watched game shows and news programs while my heart rhythm traced patterns across monitors, each steady beep a small victory in the battle for continued existence. At 4 o'clock, my phone finally rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and Eleanor answered with relief in her voice as she handed me the device with gentle encouragement. "Dad, I got Mrs. Kowalski's message. Another heart episode? How serious is this one?" His tone carried concern, but something underneath suggested this medical crisis was an inconvenience rather than a genuine emergency worthy of immediate action. "They're monitoring me closely," I replied, choosing words carefully to avoid sounding dramatic while still communicating the gravity of my situation. "Dr. Martinez says my heart is still fragile from the surgery. This setback could complicate my recovery significantly." The pause that followed stretched long enough for me to hear what sounded like restaurant noise in the background, conversations and clinking dishes, suggesting David was dining out while his father faced another potential brush with mortality. When he spoke again, his words carried the diplomatic distance I'd grown to expect during our recent communications. "That sounds really concerning, Dad. I wish I could be there, but we're actually in the middle of a critical business dinner with Stephanie's biggest client. This contract could set us up financially for years. You understand how these opportunities work, right? Sometimes timing just doesn't align with personal situations." Personal situations. My second cardiac event had been reduced to a scheduling conflict, something to be managed around business commitments and career advancement opportunities. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of disappointment settle deeper than any physical pain. "Of course, son. Handle your business. I have good care here, and the community is looking after me." The words came automatically, the gracious response Dorothy would have expected, even when facing the abandonment by the child we'd raised to value family above all else. After we hung up, Eleanor sat quietly beside my bed, her presence speaking volumes about the different ways people choose to show love when crisis demands difficult decisions. She'd left her own dinner preparations and evening routines to sit with a neighbor whose son was too busy building his future to tend his father's present needs. That evening brought visitors from the church, where Dorothy and I had shared 40 years of Sunday services and community fellowship. Pastor Williams arrived with communion supplies and prayers that acknowledged both physical healing and spiritual struggles that accompany family disappointment. The choir director brought a card, signed by members who remembered my bass voice in the church Christmas pageants and Easter services. "Your son is in our prayers too," Pastor Williams said gently, recognizing struggles I hadn't voiced, but that showed clearly in my exhausted expression. Sometimes the people we love most are the hardest to reach when they're lost in worldly pursuits, but prayer and patience can work miracles in hearts that have grown distant. Around 8 o'clock, Emma called Frank's cell phone, asking to speak with me after hearing about my hospitalization through the neighborhood network that connected extended families across Millfield's small community. Her voice carried the worried concern of a child who understood that grandparents were precious and fragile, not permanent fixtures to be taken for granted. "Are you going to be okay, Grandpa Harry? The doctors can fix your heart again, right? I need you to get better because I wrote you a special poem for your volunteer ceremony, and I want to read it to you myself." Her words brought tears to my eyes, reminding me that some people understood the importance of showing up when it mattered most. "I'm getting excellent care, sweetheart, and I can't wait to hear your poem. Tell me about your day while I rest here listening to your voice." She chattered about school activities and weekend plans, her innocent conversation providing better therapy than any medication could offer. The night passed slowly, punctuated by nurse visits and medication schedules, the steady rhythm of monitors providing mechanical reassurance that my heart continued beating despite the emotional strain of my son's absence.
Through the window, Millfield settled into sleep with porch lights creating warm circles of welcome in the darkness. Thursday morning brought Dr. Martinez with cautiously optimistic news about my condition. The cardiac episode had stabilized without causing additional damage to my already compromised heart, though my recovery timeline would need adjustment to account for this setback. Physical therapy would resume gradually, medications required modification, and follow-up appointments would need more frequent scheduling. Your support system will be crucial during this extended recovery, he emphasized, while reviewing discharge plans. Family assistance with daily activities, transportation to appointments, emotional support during what could be a lengthy healing process. Do you have reliable help at home? I thought about Mrs. Kowalski's daily visits, Frank's steady friendship, Emma's unconditional love, and the network of neighbors and church members who'd rallied around my medical crisis without being asked. Then I considered David's business dinner priorities and Stephanie's client contracts, the geographical and emotional distance that seemed to expand with each conversation. Yes, I have excellent support, I replied truthfully, though not from the source most people would expect to provide primary care during a parent's medical emergency. Friday arrived with discharge paperwork and careful instructions for modified activity levels during my extended recovery period. Mrs. Kowalski appeared with a wheelchair borrowed from the church medical equipment loan closet, ready to transport me home to the familiar surroundings where healing could continue at a pace my heart could tolerate. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message from David. Heard you're being discharged today. Brad, everything worked out okay. Business trip to Chicago next week. Then Stephanie's family visiting for Memorial Day weekend. We'll call when things settle down. Take care. Everything worked out okay? 3 days of cardiac monitoring, medication adjustments, and modified recovery plans had been reduced to a minor inconvenience that resolved itself without requiring any adjustment to his social calendar or business travel schedule. The text felt like a form letter, efficient communication that acknowledged my medical crisis while maintaining comfortable distance from its implications. Eleanor helped me into her car with the gentle patience of someone who understood that recovery involved more than physical healing. As we drove through Millfield's familiar streets toward the house where Dorothy's presence still lingered in every room, I wondered whether my son realized he was destroying something irreplaceable through his calculated indifference to family obligation. That afternoon, Frank arrived with Emma and a care package assembled by neighborhood women who remembered kindnesses I'd shown their families over the decades. Homemade soup, fresh bread, casseroles that could be heated when cooking felt overwhelming. Emma climbed carefully onto my lap, mindful of my recent hospitalization, but needing the comfort of physical closeness with someone she loved. I finished your poem, she announced, pulling a folded paper from her pocket with the ceremony of someone presenting precious treasure. Grandpa Frank helped me with some of the harder words, but all the feelings are mine. Her serious expression reminded me of Dorothy's approach to important moments, treating poetry and emotions with the respect they deserved. She read her poem about grandfathers who showed love through actions rather than words, who taught lessons through example rather than lectures, who made children feel safe and valued simply by being present when presence mattered most. Each stanza captured truths about aging and legacy that most adults avoided acknowledging, delivered with the clarity children possess before life complicates simple concepts like love and loyalty. When she finished, Emma looked up at me with Dorothy's eyes, waiting for my response to her artistic gift. "That's the most beautiful poem anyone has ever written for me," I said honestly, hugging her gently while being mindful of my healing chest. "Your grandmother would be so proud of your talent and your kind heart." "Will your son come to hear it at the ceremony?" she asked, with innocent directness that cut straight to the heart of family disappointment I'd been avoiding. I think fathers should want to see their children get honored for helping other children. Frank shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the impossible position Emma's question created. How do you explain to a child that some adults prioritize business opportunities over family celebrations? That love sometimes becomes conditional on convenience and social status? Your daddy has become very busy with his new life, I said carefully. Sometimes adults make choices about how to spend their time that children might not understand. The diplomatic answer protected everyone except the truth Emma deserved to hear about family obligations and the different ways people choose to show love. She considered this explanation with the thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to complex adult behavior.
But if someone you love does something special, shouldn't that be more important than business? Her logic possessed the clarity that adults often abandon when navigating competing priorities and social expectations. That evening, as Emma and Frank prepared to leave for their own family dinner, I received another text from David. This one included a photo of his new home's elaborate landscaping, professionally installed gardens that looked beautiful, but somehow sterile compared to Dorothy's memorial roses that bloomed each spring through love and patient tending. Landscape architects finished today. Stephanie loves how everything turned out. Really adds to the property value. The message focused on financial investment and aesthetic achievement, measuring success through contractor quality and market appreciation rather than personal satisfaction or meaningful connection to the land. I thought about Dorothy's garden, where every plant carried memories of seasons we'd shared, where vegetables fed neighbors and flowers honored relationships that transcended monetary value. Her garden grew from love rather than landscape architecture, creating beauty that nourished souls as well as bodies. Later that night, I sat in Dorothy's chair reading Emma's poem again, thinking about legacy and the different ways people choose to invest their limited time on Earth. Some pursued wealth and status, measuring success through possessions and professional achievements that impressed others but left hearts empty. Others found meaning in relationships and service, building treasure that couldn't be quantified but enriched lives in immeasurable ways. Tomorrow would bring the volunteer appreciation ceremony at Millfield Elementary, where my 15 years of reading tutoring would be recognized not for personal glory, but because children deserved adults who believed in their potential. Emma would read her poem to an audience that included neighbors, teachers, and community members who understood that true success came through service rather than accumulation. David would miss this celebration, choosing Chicago business meetings over witnessing his father's recognition for contributions that had changed countless young lives. His absence would speak louder than his presence ever could, communicating priorities that valued profit margins over the legacy of compassion I'd tried to model throughout his childhood. The ceremony would happen with or without David's attendance, its significance unchanged by his choice to prioritize career advancement over family milestones. But something fundamental had shifted during this second medical crisis, a realization that my son had transformed into someone Dorothy and I no longer recognized, someone whose values conflicted so completely with our teachings that reconciliation seemed increasingly impossible. As I prepared for bed with modified medication schedules and careful movement restrictions, I wondered whether love alone could overcome the growing distance between us, whether family bonds could survive the calculated indifference that had replaced the grateful boy who'd once hugged me after every parent-teacher conference and birthday celebration. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions I'd been avoiding, revelations that might change everything about our relationship or confirm what I'd begun to suspect about the son who'd chosen career success over the father who'd sacrificed everything to ensure his opportunities existed. The volunteer appreciation ceremony at Millfield Elementary filled the cafeteria with folding chairs and proud families celebrating community members who'd invested countless hours in children's education. I sat in the front row wearing my best shirt, the one Dorothy had picked out for special occasions, watching Emma bounce excitedly beside Frank as she waited for her turn to read the poem she'd written for my recognition. Principal Johnson stood at the makeshift podium, addressing the gathered crowd about the importance of volunteers who gave their time and hearts to help struggling readers discover the magic of books. She spoke about transformation, about children who'd entered my tutoring sessions convinced they were failures and left believing in their own potential.
Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Kowalski whispering to her sister about my recent hospitalization, how I'd insisted on attending despite doctor's orders to rest. The church ladies had formed their own cheering section, treating this ceremony like validation of values they'd watched me demonstrate for decades through quiet service and consistent presence. Emma's name was called, and she approached the microphone with the serious expression she wore during important moments. Her poem unfolded like a love letter to grandfathers everywhere, but specifically to the one who'd shown her that reading opened doors to infinite possibilities, that patience could unlock potential others had given up on, that love manifested through showing up consistently rather than making grand gestures occasionally. My Grandpa Harry taught me that helping others is the best way to help yourself, she read, her clear voice carrying across the cafeteria. He says reading gives children wings to fly anywhere they want to go, and that's why he spent 15 years helping kids discover their wings. He never missed a tutoring session, even when he was sad about Grandma Dorothy or tired from working all day. The audience listened with the respectful attention reserved for children speaking truths adults often forget. Emma's words painted pictures of dedication that went beyond obligation, of service that flowed from genuine love rather than duty or recognition. She described a grandfather who valued every child he tutored, who remembered their names years later, who celebrated their achievements as proudly as his own family's milestones. When she finished, Emma looked directly at me, with Dorothy's eyes shining with pride and love. My Grandpa Harry is a hero because he makes other people feel important, and heroes show up when people need them most. Her final line carried weight beyond her 8 years, wisdom that cut straight to the heart of what family commitment should mean. The applause that followed felt like validation of choices I'd made throughout my life, recognition that service to others created legacy more meaningful than material accumulation. As Emma returned to her seat, beaming with satisfaction at having honored someone she loved publicly, I felt Dorothy's presence as surely as if she sat beside me applauding our granddaughter's eloquence. Principal Johnson called my name, and I walked slowly to the podium, still mindful of my healing heart, but determined to acknowledge the honor being bestowed. The crowd that rose to their feet included former students, now grown, who'd driven from neighboring towns to witness this celebration. Teachers who'd watched struggling readers transform under my patient guidance. Community members who understood that true wealth came through relationships rather than bank accounts. 15 years ago, I started volunteering because retirement felt empty without purpose, I began, looking out at faces that had become extended family through shared commitment to children's success. What I discovered was that teaching children to read taught me about resilience, hope, and the power of believing in someone until they learned to believe in themselves. I spoke about students who'd overcome learning disabilities, children from challenging home situations who'd found refuge in books, kids who'd been labeled as troublemakers until someone took time to discover the intelligence hidden beneath their frustration. Each story represented hours of patient work, small victories celebrated together, breakthroughs that changed trajectories. The greatest reward of volunteering has been learning from the children themselves, I continued, feeling strength flow from the community support surrounding me. They taught me that showing up consistently matters more than grand gestures, that everyone deserves someone who believes in their potential,
and that love means prioritizing what truly matters over what merely seems urgent. As I spoke those final words, the cafeteria door opened. David entered quietly, scanning the crowd until he spotted me at the podium. His expensive suit looked out of place among Millfield's working families, but his expression carried something I hadn't seen in months: recognition, understanding, maybe even shame. Behind David walked a woman I'd never met, though her professional attire and confident bearing suggested this was Dr. Rebecca Santos, whose name I'd glimpsed on correspondence from David's former workplace. She approached Frank during my speech, whispering something that made his eyes widen with surprise before he nodded toward the podium where I stood. When the ceremony concluded and families began gathering for refreshments, David made his way through the crowd toward me. His face had lost its usual confident composure, replaced by something that looked like a man confronting uncomfortable truths about his own character. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice lacking the casual tone our recent conversations had carried. "I didn't know about the ceremony until Dr. Santos called me. She said I needed to hear something important about who you really are." Dr. Santos approached us with the professional bearing of someone accustomed to delivering significant news. "Mr. Mitchell, I apologize for the unusual circumstances, but I felt your son needed to understand what he's been missing." She turned to David with the directness of someone who'd worked with him long enough to speak frankly about difficult subjects. "Your father never told you, did he, about the scholarship fund he's been managing for the past 20 years? Her words seemed to hit David like physical blows, each revelation stripping away layers of assumptions he'd built about his father's simple life and limited achievements. "What scholarship fund?" David's voice carried confusion and growing dread as pieces of a puzzle he'd never known existed began forming an uncomfortable picture. Dr. Santos pulled out her phone, displaying financial documents that told a story David had never suspected. "The Harold Mitchell Educational Foundation has provided college scholarships to 43 students from low-income families. Your father funded it entirely through his steel plant wages and careful investments, never taking credit publicly because he said helping children shouldn't be about recognition." David stared at the documents, his face growing pale as the implications registered. 43 students. How much money are we talking about? Over $500,000, contributed gradually over 20 years. Students like Marcus Washington, who's now a pediatric nurse thanks to your father's belief in his potential despite reading difficulties. Sarah Chen, who became a veterinarian after your father encouraged her love of animals through appropriate books. Tommy Rodriguez, who's studying to be a teacher because your father showed him how education could transform lives. The cafeteria continued buzzing with post-ceremony conversations, but our corner had fallen silent as David processed revelations that recontextualized everything he'd believed about his father's modest lifestyle and limited achievements. Emma approached during this charged moment, still glowing from her successful poetry presentation. "Daddy," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around David's waist with the uncomplicated joy children express when surprised by unexpected presents. "You came to see Grandpa Harry get honored. Did you hear my poem about how he's a hero because he shows up when people need him?" David looked down at his daughter, then at me, then back at Dr. Santos with dawning horror about his own behavior during my recent medical crises.
The contrast between Emma's celebration of showing up and his pattern of prioritizing business over family couldn't have been more stark or painful. "Dr. Santos?" he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying my father has been secretly funding college educations for struggling students while living in that modest house and driving his old truck?" "Your father is one of the most generous philanthropists I've ever encountered," she replied firmly. "He's changed more lives through quiet service than most wealthy people accomplish through public charity.
And he did it all while raising you alone after your mother died, never once complaining about financial sacrifice or seeking recognition for his contributions. David's expensive watch caught the fluorescent light as he raised his hand to cover his eyes, the gesture of someone confronting the magnitude of his own moral failure. Around us, families continued celebrating community service while my son grappled with the realization that he'd dismissed and abandoned the kind of man he'd only dreamed of becoming. Emma tugged on David's sleeve with persistent affection. "Daddy, are you okay? You look sad. But this is a happy day because everyone loves Grandpa Harry, and now you get to see why he's so special." Her innocent words carried devastating accuracy about the celebration he'd almost missed, the father he'd failed to honor, the legacy of service he'd never bothered to discover. In that elementary school cafeteria, surrounded by evidence of my quiet impact on countless lives, David finally understood what he'd been throwing away through his pursuit of material success and social status. The marriage certificate in his wallet suddenly felt like worthless paper compared to the testimonials surrounding us from children whose futures had been changed through patient love and consistent presence. His granite countertops and smart home technology seemed hollow against the wealth of relationships and service that filled this simple celebration. As families began leaving and cleanup commenced around us, David approached me with tears in his eyes and words that would either begin healing the damage he'd caused or confirm that some distances couldn't be bridged even by truth and recognition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.